please welcome to the stage the president of the board of directors for BMCC, Tribeca Performing Arts Center, Jamie O'Donnell.
Good evening and welcome to BMCC's Tribeca Performing Arts Center. We are delighted to have the New York Times popular and significantly cultural conversational series Times Talks here tonight. BMCC is the largest undergraduate institution in New York City, serving 27,000 diverse students speaking over 100 languages. The Tribeca Performing Arts Center is the longest performance operating center in Lower Manhattan. We've been in operation since 1983, over 30 years, and continue strong. I highly recommend you check out our website, tribecapac.org, or go on to our Facebook or Twitter page to learn about upcoming programming. We look forward to your return to our theater in support of our programming. Thank you, and please welcome Director of Programming for Times Talks, Michelle Gray.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Gray, the Director of Programming for the New York Times live conversation series Times Talks, which pairs New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, theatre, music, art, fashion, literature, and science. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event with actor, screenwriter, director, and writer Tom Hanks, here to discuss his love of writing, the creative process, and his debut collection of short stories, Uncommon Type, Some Stories. Described as surprising, intelligent, and heartwarming, his latest literary endeavor is a must-read not only for the millions of Tom Hanks fans, but for anyone who loves good writing. What ties them all together is that they all feature a typewriter in some way. This is not as particular or as random as it seems. Tom Hanks has a collection of typewriters. He has over 250 of them, and many are beautifully photographed for the book, as you'll see. Usually a typewriter only makes a cameo appearance in these stories, though in a couple of instances, the typewriter is really the star. Here to shed more light on the nicest guy in Hollywood is tonight's moderator, Jennifer Senior, the New York Times Daily Book Critic. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jennifer Senior and Tom Hanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Jennifer, Tony, a big fan. Thank you very much. You're all right. Thank you. Thank you.
So, everyone knows that Tom Hanks is the nicest man in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. I read about it in the New York Times.
It's 100% true. He also now has the most acute case of carpal tunnel syndrome. He signed all 1,000 copies.
All your books. Do you have them? If you want it, somebody here has the lucky book that has a little bit of Caesar salad dressing on the page. So if there's a smudge, you win that extra prize.
It's extraordinary. There were Stonehenges of them back there, and he signed it. It was really...
It's what they don't tell you about getting a book published.
Is all this...
I think I have signed something in the realm of like 16,000 pages that go on the thing. I know, it's such a... it's such a burden. It's just a horrible burden. But you know what they say in the publishing business?
No.
A signed book is a
sold
book. Yes, indeed. Or in the case of tonight's, a signed book is a free book. I'm worried that when you see the grosses, as we say in my day job, or when you see the sales reports, I signed 16,000 books, and it will say 12,000 books have been sold. I said, well, I signed 16,000. What? Somebody's fallen off here.
Do you think anybody's really going to return your book? I mean, do you really think that's going to happen?
Well, the thing about books are you can use them as a coaster. You can use them. I think you would keep it just for all the multitasking purposes that you can have for
very
a book.
versatile.
You can throw them at your spouse when you're very angry at them. A lot of uses.
Weeds, there's lots of.
That's right.
So thank you for doing this.
Oh, I'm happy.
And I really enjoyed your book. So kudos. So
thank you.
So let's start with the first question I had, which was, so Robert De Niro did not write a book of short stories. Dustin Hoffman didn't, George Clooney didn't. You did. Most actors don't do this, right? So I am wondering what kind of creative need this satisfied. And well, I mean, I know you've already written.
It ain't the money, I'll tell you that.
Even you? Oh.
I think that's actually the first question that everybody asks. Now, if I was just a guy who, who's not known for in any, if I wasn't a celebrity, I don't think people wouldn't necessarily ask that question. But it's the same answer, which is a fire in the belly. There's no other way to describe it. Ultimately, I think I am frustrated by my day job. Because we have an office, Playtone, which is, we like to call it the Playtone World Headquarters, Playtone Galaxy of Stars. And we sit around all day, every single day, musing about themes that must be examined somehow. And sometimes these themes are brought to us by another medium. Sometimes people come in and pitch them. A lot of times it's just something that happened to somebody or something they read in the paper, like the New York Times, which has happened many, many times. And we end up having this discussion of how to turn that into a story that someone will pay to be entertained by. And it's never an easy discussion, because there are some stories that we hear, a lot of times nonfiction stories, in which we listen to it, we examine it, we do our homework, we read some more, we find some more about it, and we say, this cannot be a movie we make up and film with actors on a set somewhere. It needs to be a documentary, in which case we will try to make a documentary out of it. There's other times where the theme is too large, you can't compress it, you end up having to cherry pick the magnificent details of it, so it can't be a 3-act movie that costs ridiculous amounts of money and then has to compete in the marketplace. So, and then, or it's a series, or it's a limited series. There's a lot of places you can go with it. But the desire we all have, and I think the reason I probably started the company, is that I am never then creatively frustrated by the limitations of what I do in my day job. Sooner or later, someone calls you up and you are waiting for the phone call that says, would you like to help us make this story? And I don't want to be at the mercy of that phone call. I don't want to have to sit around and wait for it. Nor do I sometimes have to go and, look, we've had, you'd think that I'm such a big shot that you think people would quake when I call them and say, yeah, hey, Hank's calling from Playtone. We're going to do this thing about how you make golf balls. We think it's a fascinating story. And I'm going to play Mr. Golf Ball. Then you hang up. And you think, well, of course, well, no, they say no to us all the time, because we cannot communicate how fascinating the theme is. Right. We cannot tell them a dazzling enough story. But with writing on a page and like this, I will tell you that almost every story in here began as some core of a thing that I wanted to do, either as a film or as a documentary or something, or came out of projects that I did. For example, there's, I'm going to take a while. Would everybody just read the book right now, and then we'll talk? So you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a story in here that is, it's called Christmas Eve 1953. And it came out of the series we did, Band of Brothers, for HBO. Because we talked to, oh, well, thank you. Oh, thank you for the mercy applause. I'll take the mercy applause. If you want to groan, I'll take that too. A groan is as good as a laugh. But in talking to countless guys, actual veterans, so many of them are dead now, but when they were alive and they were willing to talk to us, sometimes for the first time, and we weren't able to get all of their stories into the series, but there were aspects of them that you meet them, and I just thought, how did these guys set up the railroad train around the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve, 11 years after Bastogne? How did they do it? And that kind of like question I got to answer in one of the stories. So the answer to your question is there's just a fire in the belly in order to try to capture some other thing that I've either pondered or has a gift that has been given to me by somebody else in the form that is an idea.
Yeah, I didn't mean to trivialize your your skills here.
Well, you're the first journalist that hasn't.
What I was suggesting is, it seems like you've been holding out on us, right? This is something that I had the sense while reading it that these have been piling up for a while. I mean, there are 17 stories in here.
Well, the newspaper columnist, you know.
Okay, you can count.
That's a little bit of filler there. We'll condense those.
All right. So let's make that one. There are 15.
Okay.
If you make that one, right? Because aren't there three?
Something like that.
Something
Yeah,
like
I'll
that?
say 15. Yeah.
So let's say 15. So, I mean, you could have done 8. You know, that's like 15 separate sandwiches you made when you could have made 8 sandwiches. I mean, so I am assuming that these were piling up for a while, right? I mean, you said some originated as screenplays.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess then my next question would be, you're a busy man. You know, when did you have the time? Did you have a process? Do you write in the same place? Do you have a lucky mug?
It goes down to, look, I think one of the reasons I have a pretty successful day job is because I naturally have an American case of attention deficit disorder. You know, it comes from knowing what time it was on TV, and on the second commercial after Love of Life, it was time to go to school. True story, actually. But the number. I was puzzled by the entire process of this. I wrote the first story that got any sort of attention is in the collection. It's called Alan Bean +4, and somehow it made it into the New Yorker. And the fact that I was able to have this concept of 4 people doing this thing, and it came out all right, was the first time I was able to bridge that kind of like roundtable discussion of what a story is and how to find it, and make it happen myself. I'd written screenplays, which is a type of translating of story onto paper, but only in the same way that drawing a design for a living room is like being it's like being a builder.
Yeah.
It's a blueprint for what a story could be.
Right.
So I was satisfied that I had the wherewithal to sit down over a long period of time and do it, but everything else was an absolute mystery, trying to make it all make sense. But I asked Peter Gethers, my editor, par excellence, and Esther Newberg, who is someone out there. There you go. Let's hear it for that lady. I said, well, how many stories does this got to be?
Yeah.
And Peter said, 15.
I'm surprised.
And I said, well, how long should each story be? And they said, well, however long they are. And so I had to think about it for a while, and I went through my head, and I probably came up with 9 or 10 that I sort of wrote down titles for that were, formed enough in my head from all these desires.
But they weren't sitting around.
Only one was sitting around.
There's
one was sitting around, which was the screenplay styled story called "Stay With Us." I wrote that in the early 1990s for a potential anthology series that never got made, in which we were going to take Greek myths and turn them into updated examinations of what they were. So, and it had to change quite a bit because the technology and my chops had changed enough from then to then. But that's the only one that pre-existed. All the others just came out of this.
They told you to do it.
Well, yeah, they do.
They said come up with 15, and you came up with 15.
Got to come up with 15. And I will admit that a number of them I had been pondering for a while, not necessarily thinking turn that into a story.
Right.
Well, there's one in here called "Welcome to Mars," that is about a kid going surfing with his dad on his 19th birthday.
I'm going to have
and
you
he witnesses something that probably he was not meant to witness. And that came about because I'm a horrible surfer, and I'm out of shape, and I don't do it very well. Mm-hmm. But there was one day in the dead of winter in LA, we had a decent swell, but it was so cold that the only guys that were out in the water were those kind of construction workers on their way to the job. So there's a lot of rancheros and pickup trucks with power tools in the back, and a guy, changing into a wetsuit and going in. So I was in a parking lot. I was walking with my surfboard down to the beach, and I saw a kind of nice sports car, and a guy in a wetsuit was sitting in the passenger seat, and a very attractive lady was sitting behind the wheel. And I just thought, what's going on there? There's something. If I was a guy making a movie, that would be a shot.
You're giving this away.
Well, then you guys, I'll give you, okay, go ahead. I'll wait. Welcome to Mars. It's on page, I don't know what on page it is.
No, you're not giving it away.
So, but there were, I don't want to, I didn't like sit
That
around
image
and say, I
is-
got to come up with stuff. I had an awful lot of
Already
themes and
there.
ideas in my
Yeah.
head that I wanted to scratch out. And the writing of it, look, how many people here write one way or another? See, it's one damn thing after another. You sit down, you do it, and you try to sit down long enough, and you try not to get up until you know what's going to happen next. You try to put it away and not think about it for some time, and other times you just get to it. And I had 4 years. Excuse me. Esther? When did we start? Here. When did we start, Esther? 3.5 years ago. So
that's a healthy
I applied myself for 3.5 years and was still a year late. I think everybody would have liked it, but too fucking bad. I'm a busy I have a day job, for crying out loud. I got to pay my rent.
Can we
I
bleep
dropped
that
the
out?
F-bomb
I don't
on
know.
that answer.
I
Yeah,
hope
sorry
they keep
about
it
that.
in. I really do. Are you like the rest of us where you write something and the next morning you wake up and you think that half of it is awful and you go all Beethoven on the delete
There's an awful
key.
lot of going
Yeah,
back and saying,
yeah.
what was I thinking? And there were some that I just
Yeah.
went down the wrong tributary and threw it right out.
I was just going to say, did some not make the cut? Are there
No.
some-
They all
it.
made the cut, but there were some that I wrote half of them and said, "This ain't it. This is not where it needs to go."
And you came back.
And you can throw it out. No one knows.
No one knows. What was is there one that was which was the hardest to birth out of all of those stories? Is there one that you're
Which
particularly...
one was a true breech birth?
Yeah.
In here.
Yeah, I would just want to know what was challenging about it to you that made it tough.
Okay, because there were some that almost were fully formed in my head when I sat down. But much like movies, I always say this about motion picture scripts, particularly screenplays, and then sometimes with the final film itself, it's like it all has to be a full deck of cards. There has to be 52 cards in this thing.
Right.
And you either have 58, in which case you got to get rid of some, or you only have 47, and you're missing some beats, and you got to do it. And even though they had fully formed things, I still had to get to 52 cards in the deck. If I was, can I take a moment and try to figure out which one was really the bitch of all bitches in this thing?
I'm asking for the bitch of all bitches and why it was a bitch. I mean, I'm actually curious.
I will. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because
I'll
it's
tell you.
always interesting to see where people get stuck. And what does it to
There were two that was really hard. One was because the past is important to us.
Oh, that was a very successful one.
Because that requires, it's about time travel, and you can't take time travel lightly. I had to work out in my head the entire logic and science and physics of the time travel in order to make it into the story. But the good news about that is you get to kind of like make it up.
Yeah.
You can come up with things like
The plasma, blah, blah.
Yeah, there's that. What a molecular singularity.
Yeah.
Well, how come we can't bring stuff back from back in, well, that's the molecular singularity. Well, yeah, I don't know what molecular singularity means, but I believe Captain Kirk once asked Mr. Spock that very thing. But it all ends up becoming a logic that you adhere to, and that ends
Right.
up helping me because it steered the story in a very specific direction. Emotionally, there's one in here called The Special Weekend, that was about a little boy on his 9th birthday. And because my parents were divorced when I was very young, they pioneered the marriage dissolution laws for the state of California. They got divorced when, man, no, but in 1961, man, only like Zsa Zsa Gabor got divorced in 1961. Nobody else did.
They were early adopters.
But I never thought that it was a unique thing. It was just, I was third of 4 kids, and my baby brother stayed with my mom, and we went off with my dad. We just thought, well, everybody does some version of this. And going back and revisiting it to get back into the head of a 9-year-old kid who just thought, it's not a tragedy. And yet there's a difference between a 9-year-old celebrating his birthday with his mom and the mom who goes to take the 9-year-old kid to try to spend a special weekend with him. That was tough. That was hard.
What was
We'll
interesting?
let you read that story right now.
That story, I looked at that story, and I have heard you describe before. I mean, didn't you have like 5 divorces in your family?
Altogether?
Yeah. Wasn't it 3 and 2?
Yes, 5.
Right.
Well, because my mom found her soulmate on her 4th marriage, and my dad on his 3rd. So, but it all worked out. I mean, they got there eventually, and they ended up being very happy. They've since passed away, but there was just no doubt. Now, it would have been maybe a little bit better if they'd done it when I was in 5th grade, as opposed to when I was 42. But nonetheless, they were able to. And there was just no look. I was there through all of their marriages, and there was just. Even though I might have been not as cognizant at 5 as I was maybe at 14, but there was just no doubt that, hey, this ain't working with you and George, Mom. Maybe you ought to move on. So they found it. But I was confused. I will tell you that, because our world did not reflect everybody else's world or what we saw on TV. It was other thing, but in a lot of ways it was very cool because we laughed a lot, we moved a lot. I never had a problem with being in new schools.
Adapting and all
Adapting.
that. Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed it, and look what I do for a job, for crying out, pretend to be somebody else.
And you also done
My siblings will disagree. They say, it wasn't that fun, and we were not confused, we were miserable.
Yeah.
I said, well, there you go, luck of the draw, what are you going to do?
But so every time I have heard you speak about this, you say it with such generosity, and you're very funny, and all I can think is that, right, somebody else, your siblings, somebody would be in therapy for 40 years talking about this, right? And right.
Not that I've ever been in
I
therapy.
wasn't going to go there, but I was thinking. But I was thinking that those stories might have allowed you to work this out in a way that's a little darker. I mean, it's rendered more darkly on the page, right, than you just said it here.
Yes, it
and
is.
I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why, is because, you don't have to perform your way through that one. You can write it, and you can work your way through it.
It's funny because all of this stuff, and forgive me, but all of this becomes some brand of self-discovery in the course of no matter what you're sort of writing, and that was one, because I realize it, as a 9-year-old boy, I actually had nostalgia for my former homes.
Wow.
You're 9.
All 9 of them?
Well, actually, by the time I was 10, I had lived in 10 different homes.
Right. So,
and if you would ask us all, we yearned for the apartment on Buena Vista Avenue in Alameda, because that's when my dad was not married, and we got to do any damn thing we pleased.
Yeah.
And we grew up like feral children. But it was a blast because, by the way, my dad moved out of that apartment without even attempting to get his deposit back. We had scarred that place to the refrigerator was on its last leg. Oh, it was a debacle when we left that place.
How many of you were there?
There was 3 of us, my older brother and older sister, and my dad, who worked in the restaurant business. So he was gone all day. He wouldn't even come home till 11 o'clock at night.
He was in the
If you scraped the amount of burnt tomato soup off of the stove, it would have been like an archaeological dig, Oh, here's the first month they lived here. Oh, now there's the second month they lived here. It just keeps going down and down and down.
But he was in the restaurant business.
Yeah, he was in the restaurant. So you write what you know,
you
isn't
write
that?
what you know,
You write what you're familiar with.
Do you want to? So I actually asked Tom Hanks to read. It's another story about family dysfunction that I think is. It's very well done. 95.
95.
95.
There it is.
It's also just a nice example of what he sounds like on the page. And there are 2 stories that I thought sort of hinted at where he came from.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
right. I mean,
yeah.
and I don't know if your family looked like this, but I thought it was another way that you were experimenting with.
Yes and no. But all right, that's fair enough. Okay.
I still thought that you wrote about it in a way that was extremely relatable. So just to set it up, this is a family that's going on a camping trip. They're starting in California. They're doing a loop through Canada, and it goes catastrophically awry. And there will be lots of names of kids in here. You don't have to pay attention to this. Just pay attention to the pathos of the parents. And this is just, lest you think that Tom Hanks is all sunshine and wholesomeness and light, there's something really interesting to me about this particular part.
I think you've just told the audience an awful lot about yourself.
Maybe I want you to be sunshine and wholesome.
Funny the,
that
the
spoke to
stories
me.
readers take to, isn't it? I will pronounce it the Yulin family. Is that okay? All right.
It's your story.
U-double-L-E-N. The trek was a long-planned Yulin family retreat and came off as promised for the first few hundred miles anyway. Then Mom started sharing her opinions and insisting on behaviors. She wanted to establish her rules of the road and began giving orders. Thus rang the opening bell, beginning the first of what became many punishing rounds. The verbal jousts became serious disagreements, escalating into full-throated, mean-spirited arguments that had to be won by the mother of the family. Chris, as was her wont, turned her rebelliousness up a few notches. Dora's righteousness devolved into deep crevassed silence, punctuated with outbursts so fast, loud, and vitriolic as to be near Shakespearean. Frank, at the wheel, sipping on his cold coffee or warming Coca-Cola, acted as referee, therapist, fact-checker, and cop, depending on the point made or the offense taken. Kirk, as his defensive stance, pulled out book after book, reading like he was a chain smoker with a carton of menthols. For him, the psychodrama faded into a background din, not much different from the wheels of the camper humming across thousands of miles of asphalt. They argued their way across Canada, continued as they came south through the vast American prairie, the space so open, so endless, it was said to have driven some of the original settlers insane. The Yulin family went certifiably daffy in Nebraska, when Chris bought pot from some guy living out of his car at a KOA campground. Mom wanted to call a cop and turn in both the dealer and her own daughter. She went DEFCON ballistic when Dad allowed no such thing by simply packing them all up and driving away, fleeing the scene of the crime. The camper went frosty, like a bitter family Christmas in July. No one talking to anyone while Kirk finished all of William Manchester's books on Winston Churchill. By the time they turned due west in Tucumcari, New Mexico, everybody wanted off the road, out of that truck, and away from each other. Chris threatened to hop a Greyhound bus the rest of the way home, but Dad insisted that they do some camping in the desert, which they did under protest. Chris got high under the stars. Dora went on solo hikes until after dark, and Dad bedded down outside in the tent. Mom slept in the camper, guaranteeing she'd be alone in peace at last by locking the door. That was a problem, as it cut off access to the bathroom. Thus ended the last family vacation for the Yulins, the last family anything for the Yulins. Thank you. Familiar turf? Anybody? Familiar vacation references there? Yeah. I've been on versions like that.
And I was wondering if
Oh, they end up being epic, man. They end up being things you talk about forever.
Yep.
Remember that disaster? Yeah. And you laugh, ha, ha, ha.
As you are.
To a degree. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
as you
know,
do, as you do. And
I would view that, that's the vacation where I read William Manchester's The Last Lion. Yeah, I remember that. That was a great vacation.
I love that you snuck that in, because I know he's one of your favorite historians. I figured there was something in there. Can I ask about another one?
Sure.
Okay, great. So the first one, which I liked quite a lot.
3 exhausting weeks.
3 exhausting weeks. So 3 exhausting weeks is about, it introduces these recurring characters. They're all lovable. The narrator is spectacularly underachieving. He's the kind of guy who would be perfectly happy to do his laundry and eat Cocoa Puffs during the day and watch, hockey games. That's a good day for him.
Living off investments and some real estate deals. So.
Right. He's got the means to do it. Yeah, right. And suddenly he dates this kind of whooshing life force who suddenly has him going scuba diving and skydiving and packing to go to Antarctica. Okay, so I read this and I thought, you achieved fame fairly early. You're very successful very early. But this guy is so well drawn that I thought, do you have an inner slacker?
Oh, dear God, yes.
Yeah, well, can you tell me all about him? I mean,
Lord.
Oh, well, okay. So does he also do that?
Well, I'm not nearly the slacker of that dude, because I have this thing built into my day job, which is if you're not working on something, if you don't have a job that is going to be shooting sometime, that means you're really carrying around nothing in your head outside of whatever creative things are going on. But as soon as you say yes to a job, you're going to play a role. Well, you start working on that. You end up clicking through a bunch of things from that moment until you're done shooting. And sometimes that can be 6, 8 months. I mean, sometimes you think, oh, I'd like to do your movie. Okay, let's do it. And you don't get to it for a year and a half. It means you're preparing for that for a year and a half. When that is not happening, it's literally, it's like, what time is Jeopardy on? It's like you've got nothing is really expected of you outside of, preventive dentistry. You've got to go to the dentist. You got kids, you got to look after them, but our kids are all grown up, and again, you got to go see the grandkids every now and again. You got to go down to the office, keep things percolating around there. Oh, but give me like a single 2 projects for the course of the day or the week, and because I don't have to really do anything for the next 8 weeks. Couldn't be happier.
So so if I squint, that is you sometimes.
You know what? I will tell you this. When I had the luck of I did a Broadway show a few years ago, and it's the greatest. Oh well, thank you. Mercy applause. I'll take that too. This thing that happens when you mount the show and you get into your second or third month. When you've done it enough weeks so that it has seeped into your DNA. You have Sundays and Mondays off. And if I could get a hockey game and 2 loads of laundry to do on those 2 days off, it was the greatest way. Glamorous as fuck. I mean, it's just, it's all, the Stork Club and Martini. No, it was a hockey game in the background and doing your laundry.
Stork Club and Martinis. Oh, may I ask you about Stork Club and Martinis?
Sure.
There's another story in there that I responded to a lot, which was about, what was it called? A Junket in the City of Light.
Oh,
yeah,
a Junket in the City of Light.
Okay.
If there's any story in this that is autobiographical, it's the story of the press junket for a movie that you go off to in Europe. It is, I will tell you, if you read it, my publicist is here, and she's going to squawk. How could you say that? She is fantastic, but a press junket for a motion picture is the most opprobrious thing that human beings have ever been put through. It is merciless. It is a level of corporate branding strategy to the degree of hackery, and they honestly think you have the stamina of an ox to drag this piece of shit movie across international date lines, and there's not a single soul you are not delighted to talk to. And it goes on forever until truly you cannot fathom words that are coming out of your mouth.
Okay, so you have anticipated my question. I was not expecting.
Completely different from talking about books. So don't you worry your. And Leslie Dart of 42 West, she would say, it's true. But we take as all the care we can, and she does. Leslie is fantastic.
But you I thank you for that extremely candid reaction.
I'm doing it to educate. When you see a movie star talking about their film, understand.
They're dying inside.
They hate themselves. The motion picture they made is a blur in the background. Even when they see it, they don't remember any of it. And they have to examine it again and again and again so that they honestly don't have a single original thing to say
At the end,
about everything on God's green earth, because they have just had to verbalize over and over again
The same
what it
part.
was like making the movie.
Right. Okay, so there's another story, and there were publicists get it on the chin too. But
Which one is that?
I can't remember it now, but I actually circled it and said, "Oh my God," twice. I'll remember it in a minute.
All
But
right.
okay, so yes, you made being a movie star seem super unglamorous and unfun and unsexy at that moment.
Outside of the fact that everything is paid for you and stay in great
Right,
place.
right,
And you know.
which was also
Well, it's in there.
It's in
yeah,
there.
yeah,
It's in there.
yeah.
No, that hotel room seemed really nice. So here, this led me to. I had this question, which was
I once woke up in a hotel room on a press junket.
yes,
I don't know how long I'd been on the press junket.
yeah.
But I woke up and I was calling, I couldn't find my wife. I said, honey, and I walked all through this suite. Where are you? Honey, where are you? I hadn't been with her in a week and a half. Kind of like discombobulated I was. And all I knew was that hair and makeup was coming at 8:15, and I was just,
Did you know what city you were in?
I had no idea what city I was in.
hemisphere? I mean,
No,
nothing.
you lose it after a while.
You lose it after a while. Okay, so this leads directly into a question. You'll forgive me.
Uptown problems, I know, everybody.
but
I know
wait-
these are uptown problems,
But
and
I
I'm
think-
not complaining.
No, I know, and I know that you are not saying that your life is the same as a janitor's or a coal miner's, but I am really genuinely interested in what the tedium is in your life. And I am. I mean, I know what the tedious parts of
I
my
wrote some of this on some press. conferences.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting to know. But I also, it raises a bigger question for me because it's not every day that I talk to somebody who is as famous as you. And there is the life that I imagine that you live. And then there are the ground realities that I'm sure, right, that you negotiate every day. And I think the gulf between like what I imagine and what you actually live is probably pretty extreme. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about like what our biggest misconception about celebrity would be? Because you just gave a great kind of, précis right there. I mean, what else do we get wrong?
It's an interesting question because I don't know if it's communicable. I mean, honestly, one of the reasons I wrote A Junket in the City of Light was for that very reason.
Yeah.
To say this is what it is. This is what is expected of you sometimes. Because everything else is fun. Look, I've loved what I've been doing ever since I figured out that you could go to high school and take a drama class instead of drafting or sociology. Count me in. I'll do that.
Right.
But everything else ends up being a learned skill that, unfortunately, you only can figure out by getting your ass kicked over and over again, and realizing that these people do not have. They're not going to make anything easier for you. Now, the acting, the performing that's an instinctive, instinctive creative thrust that you follow without even having to think. Everything else becomes some version of self-protection.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we've been living, I think, in literally George Orwell's 1984 ever since they invented the iPhone, and they invented a camera. There's no such thing as a degree of privacy. And so you have to start. I think the biggest work that I'll just speak for myself. The biggest work I think that takes effort and requirement and philosophy and planning is the division between the private and the public.
Yeah.
Public requires this thing that you must adhere to because it's like being a celebrity is like walking around in a huge rubber chicken costume. Everybody says, "Hey, look at the dude in the big rubber chicken costume." And you just get
And they
attention.
feel that they can do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's their right to walk up to the rubber chicken.
And on
Yeah.
privacy, it's like, you got to deal with the ins and outs that everybody has in any sort of realistic life dynamic, in which case nothing that you have achieved helps you at all.
Right. You're not
Except
innocuous.
except the money is fantastic. No, I mean, money does not make you happy, but it solves all sorts of problems. All sorts of things go away. I have type 2 diabetes, not to get on a side, but I got type 2 diabetes. And I can pay to have good food made for me,
That's
and
right.
I can see a doctor, and I can have all this kind of like stuff taken care of me. And that's because I have a lot of money. If I did not, I would be in a really, really different situation than I am right now.
Richard Greenberg, the playwright, had that line where he said, "It doesn't buy you happiness, but it upgrades despair." And that's, I think, what you're talking about.
Well,
in some
yeah,
way,
well,
right?
you know, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that if you're the type of person that wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and looks out the window and says, "What is happening to me?" Money and celebrity ain't going to have anything. You're
okay.
just kind of like bent to do that, for no
Okay.
matter where you are in the food chain.
So, the loss of privacy, I am really interested in this, particularly because you are known as the nicest guy, and it's totally true. Everybody loves.
I'd love it if there was a word beside nice.
I know.
Is there some other thing?
Upstanding,
Because you know what is
menschy,
nice?
super
you know what's
menschy.
nice? A German chocolate cake is nice. You know.
Super
you know.
menschy. I know. I'm sorry.
Super menschy?
Super
All right,
menschy?
let's go with that.
You're an adorably menschy
Wow,
man.
adorably menschy. That's
adorably
that's
menschy man. That's what I would.
nothing wrong with adorable. I guess.
Yeah. No.
You know, decent. Look,
Decent and upstanding.
I guess I'm always trying to figure out if I've done anything wrong. You know.
But you haven't disgraced yourself in any way that I mean, which is already.
Well, there's
a
people
big-
that would disagree.
Well, not in front of us.
You'd be amazed at
loved
the
you back
things that
there.
people will say. You have disgraced yourself for doing.
Okay, well, here is the one burden, though, that I wonder about this, which is, so I know you spoke to my colleague Maureen Dowd about, you know, the ways that this may or may not be an inhibiting label, being called the nicest guy.
Yeah.
And you said, look, it's not that I tolerate being shoved around. I push back.
I will not. I will not let you take advantage of my good nature.
Right.
I will tell you that right now.
And,
yes.
and I think that's. I love that.
Don't you even think.
Okay, but here's a more serious question, which is, and I get that, but how about when you're feeling really sad or you're feeling really frightened? Okay, so I keep thinking now about your wife, about Rita,
Oh, yes, yeah.
and about how she has just had this really grueling and really frightening surgery for breast cancer. And by the way, I don't know, she's not here, I guess, right?
She's actually tonight. She's singing at the Cafe Carlyle.
Awesome.
So,
Okay, well, brilliant.
with a band. So, the strongest, most amazing woman I've ever
Just
seen.
thank her, because her transparency on this is something,
that-
go read her on Facebook about this stuff. Go read her and people. She's been amazing. Anyway, and
Her willingness to do that, I thought, was superhuman.
But it's also, she talked about, it was sort of news you could use, you know, double check your pathology
Yeah,
reports. All that
yeah.
stuff it's stuff that I think a lot of women don't know. But going back to that, so she's going through something really painful and really grueling, and you are, I'm assuming, really scared and really frightened with her. And then you go out into the world, and people expect you to be Tom Hanks. They expect you to be this sweetheart. But what if you just want to be really sad?
Well, that's where the work comes in, the dividing line between the public and the private.
But how do you? I
You
can't
have to-
imagine not having the
well-
flexibility to be sad.
Well, there's
Yeah.
some times where you just force it. I mean, no, there is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like that kind of thing. Oh, you know, you can't go there. Yeah, you can go there. Just go in. Just go. Go. Look, what I'm not going to go get yogurt with the grandkids. Go get yogurt with the grandkids, and they might recognize you. Oh no, they recognize me. so who cares? But I don't mean to be flip. It is something that you make your peace with.
Right.
And it takes a long time sometimes for people to make your peace with it. I was. If we're talking about such things, Oprah, I would say that I was very lucky because nothing happened overnight for me. I did 3 years of classical repertory theater, and I came to New York, and lightning struck, and I got on this kind of show that no one really watched, but lasted for 2 years. And Bosom
Speak for
Buddies, thank
yourself.
you. No plug. Ah!
All on YouTube.
It's
You can
funny
YouTube them
how
all.
years after the fact, it becomes the cult classic Bosom Buddies. Where the fuck were those people when we really? Well, we would have loved to do anything. But that it was over a long period. I shudder at the idea. I shudder for anybody who does a thing and then enters into the national consciousness in such a riotous way.
Yeah.
It is because look, it was like slowly climbing in altitude, and then you come back down a couple of thousand feet, and you can breathe okay, and you're not going to get sick. And for anybody that happens quickly, the learning curve is so steep. No wonder it just devours some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
I mean, again, uptown problems, but if you're not prepared for it, if you don't have some degree of either grounding individually, or the purpose to go into the business in the first place, or a team around you that will just say, "Dude, we got to protect you here a little bit." It's the what is it? The entertainment kind of like. What is it? Entertainment industrial complex.
Yes.
Makes mincemeat out of people that have difficulty with that learning curve, and it's
Which
steep.
I think might explain why people find it sort of miraculous that your personality and your authentic self is to some degree intact. I mean, that might be the reason. 21 minutes. If people want to start lining up in the aisles to ask questions, in about 1 minute, we're going to start doing Q&As. I'll just wrap it up with this one, since we're on this tear.
Sure. Oh, and yet,
excellent.
a message. Well, the owner of parking lot.
Wouldn't that be great?
I love that.
the guy with the blue Hyundai.
The Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor.
So, the one thing I was thinking, right, so are there things that you do just so that you can still feel like you were at 20? Do you like fill up your own car with gasoline, or you know what I mean?
Well, I drive a Tesla.
Well.
But my dog is so old that she can't climb in the back of it, so I have a Ford Transit van. And yes, I go to the gas station and I fill it up with gas.
But that
It's extraordinary. It takes me forever
People
to
wanna
figure out
know.
how it works.
people want to know. They want to know this thing.
They
So
do.
are people? I can't quite make out. I think people are standing. And have the mics been distributed?
What's on the cards? Is it something
They're
new?
Facebook Live questions.
Oh,
so I'm
oh,
going to
oh.
start asking you. Okay. So, and the only thing I would ask, if you have a question for during the Q&A part, is that you can only get an A if you ask a Q. You have to ask a question. You cannot actually. It can't be a declaration.
Because let me tell you something. This is when you're on a press junket, and I don't want to turn this into my bitterness over press junket.
By all means, do.
But this is what it never happens so much with print media, but it almost always happens when you're on TV, and someone comes in and they say, "So, Forrest Gump." But now you're searching for Da Vinci.
There's no question there.
Not a single question.
How do you
there.
feel that? What do you even do? No, really, that would. How do you? Okay, I'm not even. So don't do that. None of that. The other thing that I've been told, and they're very strict. Don't take advantage of the fact that he is the nicest guy. Please don't ask for selfies, and please don't ask for him to read your screenplay, or to sign anything else, because he signed. Did I mention he really did sign all 1,000 copies of the books that you got tonight? So just. So those are the instructions from above, and they all seem very reasonable.
Yeah,
Okay.
you don't mess with a paper or record. You just do
Yeah.
not.
So I'll read from Samantha from Facebook.
Hey.
Asks, how do you handle self-doubt and discouragement in your creative works?
Oh, that you end up, okay, that's actually a great question, because you can't do it if you have self-doubt. You can't do it if you have self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is the death of acting.
Yeah.
Performing a role requires somehow you get past every aspect of observing yourself and what you're doing. That means you cannot be sensitive about how you look in a hat or the way your voice sounds. You work on it and to change it, and from that, you trust a process that you have slowly learned over and over again of what to do. Knowing full well you'll discover what not to do, but self-doubt is the same thing as self-consciousness. You trust your own individual process to get you there. And
So you learn how to vanish.
Man, just hope that it works out.
Hope that it works.
Because there's also sometimes just pure serendipity ends up coming into question. I stopped going to, well, this is one of the reasons I enjoyed writing the book, because every time I went back and read something, I enjoyed it. I could see what it is, and I was anxious to either embrace it more wholly or make a few changes here and there, even though still, now that it's published, I read something and say, why didn't I do this instead? I stopped going to dailies on motion pictures a long, long time ago because there's absolutely no objectivity when you go see it. You could think it's great in dailies and you see it in the movie and it doesn't matter a whit. You have to have you have faith in the serendipity and also the work that everybody else puts into it in order to shape it. And, it's malleable up there. It's not set in stone.
So you have to just back away.
Back away
from the car.
and offer sacrifices to the great goddess Pulicula, who is the goddess of all film and cinema.
Diane from Facebook asks, this is a good question. In your extensive body of creative work, what are you most and least proud of?
You know, those superlatives are just so easy to ask.
Well, how about what's most important? You know, what you think is your most important work, maybe, or I don't want to change her question. We have to let's go with her question.
Look, I think it ends up being the long-standing connection you have to what you did. And I think I'm lucky is that I remember no small amount of the process in order to get somewhere on a movie. Now, it's not in every movie. Sometimes I've seen stuff. Look, I made some really crappy movies, I know. And there's been some times I look at it as I don't believe a single thing of what I said. I see where it kind of works. But periodically, if you're lucky, you get to lay claim to trying to do something. No applause, please. This is not. Castaway was a thing we worked on for 6.5 years. And it came out almost, don't you take it Don't you do it. And I'm very proud that we got there. Yeah. I did when I played Chesley Sullenberger. As soon as I met the man, I thought this is going to be the hardest manifestation because he is absolutely nothing like me. I am absolutely nothing like him, and I was going to have to go to some other extremely controlled place.
He was so bottled up. It was amazing that
And you're also working with Clint Eastwood, who is this is his direction.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
That's all you got. That's all you got to work with.
That's it. And then when you were done, he said, "Oh, that's enough of that." That's it. So the joke is, well, which is my favorite child? You can't do it. All you can do is remember the effort that you put into it and whether or not you got there. So much of I am very lucky because as far as writing stories goes, because my job as an actor is to provide all of this material. I don't have to talk about it, I just have to do it. Right. I have to make it manifest. And then they take it and do other things. Writing fiction was the same thing. I just had to make it manifest on the page. Right. Then I handed it over to Esther and Peter and everybody else and said, is this a thing? And if it was a thing, they'd say yes or no. And it ended up being surprisingly more of the same process than I anticipated. And then all the decisions, I didn't know what order they should be in. Peter figured it out.
They dovetail nicely.
You'll get to choose the typeface in the paper. I said, pick one. I don't know. What do I know about typefaces?
What do you know about typeface? You own 250 typewriters.
Well, that's true. I do. But most of them are Pica typeface, and so they're all more or less the same thing.
Fair enough. Do we have people queued up? Okay.
Yeah. Tom, I don't think of you as a nice guy.
Excellent.
Although I think you probably are. But what I do think you of is somebody who, for whatever reason, represents in your roles the best in American values. And that's why I think you're as popular as you are. In fact, my son tore me off Mount Marcy to go see Saving Private Ryan. Oh. And we were 20 seconds from the top. But he's a history teacher, so you're forgiven. But what would you say to the 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds who, between your movies, there's you can't make this stuff up, what's going on today. What do you say to the new generation of kids who are looking at an adult world that's very infantile?
Wow.
There's a question with a preamble.
First of all, I'm going to do everything I can to dodge this question. No, I understand what you're saying, and I can only do it with my own individual kids, because we talk about everything at the same time, just as I'm sure you do with yours. And I always fall back on history. That I say, we've elected knotheads to elective office before. We've gone off and gotten involved in hideous complications before. I just finished, I'm now reading Yuval Harari's Amadeus,
Yeah.
and I read Sapiens just before that. And I go back to Ecclesiastes. It's vanity of vanity, all is vanity. There's nothing new under the sun. We have been here before. So have faith in a couple of things. Number one is the long haul. And number two is your ability, their ability to distinguish what is right and what is wrong. It's going to be hideous. Just at the same time, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to come up at different times. But if you read some of the people that I read, like is it The Glory and the Dream or The Dream and the Glory by William Manchester? 1932 to 1972.
I have brain
It's like ripped right out of today's headlines. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, nor am I trying to help you raise your children, sir. But I would say we've been here before. If you're worried about the present, read history and come to your own conclusions.
Have you met him? Have you met Trump?
I will tell you the one time
Oh,
I met, at that point, a man who would never be president of the United States in 800 million years. He was doing the Celebrity Apprentice. No, it was just The Apprentice before the Celebrity. It might have been the first year. And I was at a fundraiser for the motion picture home just the night before either the Emmys or the Oscars. And he was there. And we said, "Hey, Donald, hey, you're fired," or something like that. I said something like that to him.
oh, you said that to him?
Yeah.
Was that destabilizing for
Well, that's what everybody was yelling at.
Right, of course.
That was pretty much it.
It
You
was
got
like-
a kooky show, Don. Kooky
Right.
show. That was it.
It was like Wilson.
So long, yes.
Yeah.
That was
It
a
was-
long time ago.
Got it.
You want to tar me with that brush? Go right ahead. That's what I said to the future president of the United States.
Go ahead.
Hi, Tom Hanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My dad and I are so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here.
Just to let you know, my dad, Louis, in the first row who I'm sitting next to, watches Castaway every single day.
Really?
On HBO every
Wow.
day. He loves it.
Wow.
My question is, how do you prepare differently for a movie like Charlie Wilson's War versus Sully? And number two, you should have been nominated for Sully.
My crack staff is over there. Duh. Well, there is no way of doing it. You just got to figure it out. Luckily, those two movies, Charlie was alive. Charlie Wilson was alive. He had this book, and I was just trying to. I just wanted to find out how he did what he did and how fantastic it was. From a purely external place, you'd see how they sound, talk, walk. There's things you can do physically in order to alter your gait and what have you. With Sully, it was. I was just trying to find. Both of these guys. There were books about both events, but the books end up being this other kind of translation of it that doesn't quite. It's good for the screenwriters, not necessarily great for the actors, because you have to end up asking questions like, you want to be a journalist that says, what was that like? You have to ask questions like, when did you feel it was over? When did you feel a sense of accomplishment? What was the pressure on you in these phone calls? And you just, you don't have enough time. I mean, a lot of times I wish we had a year and a half to prepare for some of these roles, and you just don't. So you hope and pray that you can capture, one of their T cells and plant it inside you, and have you grow everything that you need in order to be it.
Hi.
Hi.
So I've been a huge fan of your work for years, but what I really loved was when you came back to Broadway a few years ago.
I did not come back to Broadway.
Okay.
I came to Broadway because the first time I was around, I'd never had the opportunity to have the job that would allow me to come back to Broadway. I did not get any jobs the first time I was around.
Well, what I would really like to know is what made you come to Broadway, and what does a script have to be in order to get you to come back? Like, what do you look for in a script to make you to come in? Because it's such a long commitment.
But it's a lovely commitment.
Right.
And in all honesty, I think you go back to Broadway in order to be a pure type of actor again. Broadway gives you this one thing, and I didn't discover this until deep in the run. I was trying to figure out why is it that I can't wait to get to the theater every day? Why is it I'm looking forward to doing the 120-second performance of this play? When do I get to start phoning it in? Because I always get kind of worked up. And this is what it is. You get to begin at the beginning of the story every night, and you get to carry it through. And as soon as you start, the audience gives you something that you work off of. They might need something to be laid out a little more specifically. Matinees for that play was Lucky Guy. It was about the New York Daily News and the Post and all that. The matinee audiences were the New York audiences, the people that do not want to have dinner in Times Square. They are there to take the physical record, get the playbill of the show they saw. And they were white hot. They were so far ahead of us at every turn. That play, I did that because Nora wrote something that I thought was extraordinary, and I wanted to work with Nora again, and the idea of doing this play about a very specific guy who lived through this raucous time. I thought it was going to be a theme and a character of a guy who was not quite as good as everybody else, but made more money than everybody else. He was not Jimmy Breslin. He wasn't one of the Hamills. He was Mike McAlery, and he was a good writer. He wasn't a great writer, and yet he rode the wave. And I thought that's a theme to examine. And Nora and George Wolfe, who directed it, we all went bananas on it. Then Nora died, and we didn't know whether we could go along and do it or not. And we all just decided, fuck it, let's do it, and we'll just pretend Nora's here. So the play has to bristle, quite frankly. It's got to be something that is wild. I don't want to be pompous, but let me be pompous for a moment. I don't see myself as doing revivals, because unless you can do something like an incredibly brand new, different kind of like take on it, I don't know that I have anything to offer up to a revival per se. Not that they're there's like I just saw Laura Linney and the Little Foxes. Yeah, fantastic. Denzel is doing The Iceman Cometh. I'll be there for that. Yeah. There's a lot but as far as the wherewithal that it takes to come and be on Broadway, the life that you lead, you got to live like a monk, and you've got to be dedicated to preserving everything for those 8 performances a week. It has to be something that throws pretty deep, and as long as the play throws deep and I have room for it in my life, I'll do it. But room for it in your life, that's the key. You don't do Broadway lightly. You don't. You gotta come in and be armed for bear.
It doesn't sound pompous. It actually sounds humble to say that you're not going to do something that you can't bring anything new to. just as an aside.
Well, but that, you know, check me in a year and guess what? Hey, I'm doing high button shoes.
I'd go see that. I mean,
It's
that
a
would be
toe
fun.
tapping musical that hasn't been done for 30 years. We're going to rewrite the whole damn thing. Tom Hanks in high button shoes.
I'm trying to, yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Is this on?
Ah, yes.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Hanks, for your sincerity and purity that you bring to the craft. And thank you for plugging in for the preventive dentistry. That's very important.
Very important.
I wanted to know if you typed the stories with a typewriter, and why typewriters? Why is it your favorite?
I was in Atlanta, and I bought a new Smith Corona electric Selectomatic. You remember the Selectomatic?
Yeah, we had one.
It
in my
had the
house.
cartridges.
Yeah.
You typed, oh, I made a mistake. Take the cartridge out, put in the correcting cartridge, type, back, KDLL. Put the cartridge back in, you could type. I typed about 5 pages of a story called A Month on Green Street, and then went stark raving nuts because you can't really write anything longer than a love letter or a grocery list or some memos on a typewriter.
No cut and paste.
But well, you can cut and paste, but guess what you're using? Scissors and paste.
Scissors and paste.
Oddly enough, thus the term, I believe. But I would write notes, and I would write very brief, kind of like, you know, reminders to myself on a. I use a typewriter every day.
What'd you type today?
I tell you what I typed today. I typed up reactions to a movie that I saw yesterday, so I would remember it.
What did you write?
Well, I saw this great movie that's going to be coming out directed by Joe Wright, and I'll be talking to Joe Wright in a couple of weeks, and so I typed out my impressions and questions that I had about the movie and how we made it and what that would mean if we go into business together.
And you're going to give it to him, and he's going to
No,
keep
I'll
it?
use it in your order to read.
Oh.
My crack staff is here, and they tell you I will drive them nuts with my typewriters. At the office, I have 3 or 4. They're all out. They're all margined to a certain thing for a certain type of piece of paper.
So when you take, if you're depressed or if you're happy, are there moods?
No, it's kind of like, is this like an official letter, or is this like a kooky thing, or is
Yeah.
this just a note? And I travel with a typewriter wherever I go, and I have one up at the house, and I'm trying to give away as many typewriters as I can, because when I croak, I don't want my kids to throw the typewriters in with me. I have far too many machines. Typewriters are like, there's a story about the guy who sells typewriters.
Yeah.
Typewriters are like pianos. Yeah. They have to be played. And if you have 19 pianos, that means you have to play 1 piano a day.
Yeah.
But I find them to be the best and most clear way to communicate for the record. I've said this before, so forgive me if you've heard it, but no one throws away a typewritten letter.
They don't.
I was at Nora Ephron's house, and she had in a frame a thank you letter for a lovely lunch in Jamaica that was written by Ian Fleming. And
That's crazy.
It said the date on it.
Oh, in Jamaica, of course, right?
Yeah.
Golden
It was a
Eye
date
or
on
whatever.
it. It
yeah.
said 1950-something, and it said, oh, darling, thank you so much for the most wonderful lunch. The Pim's cups with a perfect chilled, and who doesn't enjoy a fresh lobster? Let's do it again, Ian. And I thought, no one's going to throw it. No one's going to throw that
No
away.
way.
So I like to fancy that anybody who uses a typewriter is creating a one-of-a-kind work of art that will last absolutely forever, as long as you don't burn it,
And I hear you are a very promiscuous giver of typewriters to people if they want.
First of all, I have a lot of great typewriters, and I have a lot of really shitty typewriters. You'd be surprised at how often I pass off those crappy typewriters. And I will tell you this, most of my typewriters are worth around $50 to $60. But when I sign them, they are worth as much as $50 or $60. Out they go.
It looks like we're out of time, and I really can't think of a better note to end
You're
this
very
on.
kind.
You're
This was
lovely.
lovely.
You were lovely. You were lovely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.